A worm?
What's up, y'all? Today we're gonna talk about AI. AI is everywhere. Have you seen those AI videos of Jesus hugging the animals and they turn into black people?
If I got Jesus, I've got all.
That shit is racist as fuck, okay? That's not what we're here to talk about today. There's a lot of problems with AI. The entertainment industry trying to replace writers, artists, even actors, and singers. Bad. Okay, don't do that. But something we're gonna talk about today is actually using AI to write. We're gonna talk about a lot of the limitations of that, okay? Hi, I'm a student in school and it sucks. I'm actually back in school, okay? And all the kids that are younger than me, they're using AI to do different things with writing. It is very interesting. I've dibbled and dabbled a little bit. But let me tell you what AI is not useful for. Writing entire essays. I had a class assignment that we're going to talk about today. And basically, the assignment was to write an essay about digital humanities, then rewrite the essay with AI. Here's what we're going to do today. We're going to go through a comparison of the essays. And as we're comparing, we're going to talk about these limitations of using AI to write. And I'm going to tell you what I think it's actually useful for. And what it's kind of useless for. Okay? Let's get into it. So, before we get into really comparing and contrasting these essays, I want to explain my prompting and why I decided to use Deepseek as well. Something I like about Deepseek is that it explains its thought process as it's spitting out an answer. You can basically see the AI thinking and reasoning around your prompt. And I think that's very useful to understanding how to prompt for different things. What I ended up prompting in Deepseek was write a 1,000 to 1,500 word essay responding to the following research question. How does the combination of algorithmic recommendation, content moderation, and demonetization create an apparatus for prioritizing accounts that align with the corporate priorities of social media platforms? Attempt to incorporate citations in your response. That prompting was just based on my own research question, and I'll read my research question to you. How does the combination of algorithmic recommendation, content moderation, and demonetization create an apparatus for prioritizing accounts that align with the corporate priorities of these platforms? So we're both responding to the same research question. I thought that would be important for even comparing and contrasting. Can Deepseek write an essay that you can turn in for school? Oh! Can Deepseek even write an interesting paper? No. That's our short answer is no, not really. But we're going to get into why exactly that is the answer. Now, according to my teacher, okay, I got an A on my essay. Now, according to me, Deepseek got a C. And we're going to go into all of the different reasons why. But one of the primary problems with using AI, large language models like Deepseek, like ChatGPT, to write essays is citation etiquette. Half of the citations in this paper are not real. They are non-existent papers. I'm reading this paper, right? And I'm like, yeah, this is a fine paper. But because I've used Deepseek before to find sources, I know that Deepseek has a problem with spitting out fake citations. So I went through all of the citations. There are several points in the paper where they are citing something that is completely not in the bibliography. There are 5 whole lines of text within this essay that Deepseek wrote that have no citation within the bibliography. That's a huge issue. If you don't tell people what you are citing, how do we know that you're actually citing anything? So there's several points in the paper where it just says Hutchison 2022 and then nothing in its references. And I'm like, who is Hutchison? Do they have a first name? What is the name of the article? AI is not good for that. So that is a dead giveaway. Okay, kids? Now, the citations that they did provide, do you want to know how many of the citations that Deepseek provided that were actually real papers? There is one source in Deepseek's references that is cited correctly. And by correctly, I don't just mean like incorrect formatting. No. I'm just talking about correctly dating the paper, saying the right name of the thing they're citing, and the correct author of the thing that they're citing. One time, out of their 7 citations that they provided, only one of them was accurate. That alone should have failed them. Out of these 7 citations, so there's one that's completely correct. So one of them just has a wrong date. 3 of them have incorrect titles, wrong dates, and wrong authors. So when I went to Google these articles, they just were not coming up. And I'm like, okay, well, I found this article by this person from this year that's titled this. And I don't know if you got that information from this. Right? And then there were 2 that I just could not find at all. Like, I could not find any articles by the author at the source that they provided. When I Googled the article name, so many different authors and like takes on this topic came up. I have no idea where half of the information in this essay came from. And that's kind of unacceptable. Okay, so beyond citation etiquette, which was atrocious from Deepseek, there are some other things that I want to kind of get into that are kind of stylistic. Now, there's something that I can really tell when I'm reading the Deepseek essay. There's just something about it that is very generic. Even though the research question is so specific, their topic sentences are not really topic sentences. And mind you, I write in a way that is not so, like, stilted. Somehow, the Deepseek essay is both stilted and not very well organized. So let's say it like this. Okay. The way that Deepseek organized their essay was they just had, like, different headers for each topic, which is just like, you don't need a header for one paragraph, right? It's a very strange way to organize an essay. A header, 2 paragraphs, a header, 2 more paragraphs, a header, 2 more paragraphs. That's just strange. There's also no need to like put like conclusion before your conclusion. These are things that you can take out, but what's funny about it is that paragraphs are written in a way in which the paragraphs don't really flow into each other. Let me show you something. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to read the last sentence and the first sentence of the next paragraph. So let's start with the first sentence of the first paragraph, and then we'll do that. So first, last. And it'll give you a sense of like the flow. In the digital age, social media platforms have evolved from mere communication tools into powerful arbiters of public discourse. Cool. Adequate hook. This essay argues that the synergy of these systems creates a feedback loop that amplifies compliant content while marginalizing material that threatens corporate interests, effectively shaping the digital landscape to serve platform economies. Cool. Let me also say this. The paragraphs, they're just broken up really strangely. Like it's written as 2 paragraphs, but it's really 1 paragraph. So really the first sentence of the paragraph is, algorithmic recommendation systems are the engine driving user engagement on platforms like YouTube, Facebook, and TikTok. Okay, cool. Last sentence. This creates an invisible hand guiding creators towards topics and styles less likely to trigger demonetization or suppression, effectively aligning their output with corporate priorities. That makes sense. But then, see, here's the next sentence after that. Content moderation operates as the gatekeeper of platform acceptability. How do we connect those ideas? We just went straight from, okay, we're talking about algorithmic recommendations right now. I'm done talking about algorithmic recommendations. Now we're going to talk about content moderation, right? Without even so much as like a transitionary word. right? Not even like a secondly or a now let's talk about content moderation or something like that, you know? Here's something that Deepseek does in this section that is very interesting. Why does Deepseek know the word adpocalypse? That's very interesting to me. But what I'm also wondering is what they don't define adpocalypse at all, right? Kind of assuming that as a reader you would be familiar with the word adpocalypse. Right, that's something that you need to define, especially if you're writing an essay about social media for someone who is not a social media user, not somebody who's chronically online, who knows 2017 adpocalypse. I don't know many people in my life that would know the word adpocalypse. So that's an interesting thing. But their reasoning here is also very interesting to me. So they cite this book that does exist, Custodians of the Internet by Tarleton Gillespie. And they use this citation from Tarleton Gillespie to define content moderation. Tarleton Gillespie in Custodians of the Internet describes moderation as a form of governance where platforms enforce community guidelines to protect users and advertisers. The governance is in quotations, and again, there's no citation there. What page was that on? IDK. I'm sure Gillespie says governance in more than one page. However, moderation extends beyond removing hate speech or violence. It subtly shapes visibility. For example, Facebook's news feed algorithm downgrades borderline content that, while not violating policies, risks user dissatisfaction or advertiser flight. What does that mean? So what does the word borderline content mean? Another term that they don't define. Violating policy risks user dissatisfaction and advertiser flight. User dissatisfaction is the broadest thing ever. That could mean so many things, right? User dissatisfaction could mean the discrimination against marginalized creators. That's something that I explicitly talk about in my paper. So in my paper, I talk about how content moderation often deems marginalized people as inappropriate. The study that I cite for that is a study that was chronicling how people are developing algorithm speak. If you're familiar with the way that people have started to talk online, saying the word segs, like S-E-G-G-S instead of the word sex, lesbians instead of lesbian. This is users responding to content violations, specifically on TikTok, where they've noticed when they use these words, they might get a content violation strike, versus if they use the altered algo speak, they're less likely to get those content violation strikes. The study I was citing with that was a study done by Elistine, Catherine Yuchko, and Daniel Klug, called You Cannot Say What You Want, Using Algo Speak to Contest and Evade Algorithmic Content Moderation on TikTok. It's an actual article that you can read that kind of chronicles the different ways that Black creators, gay creators, Muslim creators have had their speech and bodies flagged as inappropriate by the algorithms. I guess we can call that user dissatisfaction. You know what I'm saying? That's the broadest thing that you could call that. But because I'm interested in saying something very specific and being very pointed about what I want to talk about, I'm someone who cares about algorithmic bias against marginalized communities, particularly Black communities and queer communities, because those are the communities I belong to, right? I am interested in specifically naming that. Deepseek, who is a robot who does not have community alliances and allegiances, is just completely satisfied with just saying user dissatisfaction. This is the most important thing to think about when you're writing with AI, okay? The AI has nothing interesting to say. The AI has nothing more interesting to say than you would have to say. And I want everybody to know that. Like, you have communal alliances, you have biases. Biases are taken as like this kind of negative thing, like, oh, check your bias. Oh, you're biased, so you don't have an objective view on this, da-da-da-da-da. I think that's a simplistic way of understanding what a bias is. Certainly, biases color your interpretation of information, but as a human being, there is no such thing as being without an interpretation of information that is specific to your subject position. I go through the world having certain experiences and experiencing the world according to how I look, speak, how I grew up, how I internalized my sense of self within the world around me. that is going to color how I interpret information and how I write about that interpretation of information, right? Deepseek has none of that. So Deepseek, again, is satisfied with just saying user dissatisfaction to describe things like algorithmic racism, the flagging of LGBTQ communities as inappropriate. It's up to you as a reader and as a writer to ask yourself whether or not that is an adequate description of the situation, right? That is something that Deepseek cannot do. What are your priorities in your writing and in your research? Deepseek will never be able to represent those priorities for you in an adequate way, in a way that really gets to the heart of things. You can probably try to play around with prompting and all of that and say, hey, yeah, if we're talking about racism, name it explicitly. The fact that the half of the citations are incorrect is just like, what's the point? What's the point of getting Deepseek to write a well-written paper with a bunch of fake citations? Let's talk about the next section of this paper. Now we're just in the demonetization category. Demonetization, the withdrawal of ad revenue from content deemed non-advertiser friendly, complements moderation by financially disincentivizing risky materials. Risky materials. Platforms like YouTube employ automated systems to flag content involving controversial issues or sensitive events, often with opaque criteria. I like that Deepseek recognizes that YouTube's content moderation or the content demonetization system kind of works in a very opaque way, meaning it's not clear exactly why something would be flagged for demonetization. It's not like YouTube has published like a data set of all the times that they have flagged content for demonetization that people can go through, run analyses on, and really understand. 9 times out of 10, this kind of content is going to get flagged for demonetization, versus for this kind of content, it might be 3 times out of 10, right? That kind of data is not available. And this is kind of what I got into my paper. I cited a study called The Ethics of Algorithms by Brent Mittelstadt et al. In that paper, they kind of got into it a little bit more, how the decision-making processes that the algorithms are making when it comes to any of these things, so when it comes to whether it be monetization, moderation, recommendation systems, in general, the data that the algorithms are using are not transparent. There is not a mass of data sets that YouTube is either publishing for the public to go through, or even collaborating with like third-party data analysts, right, to check for, oh, is there something happening against protected classes of people that maybe we as YouTube are not catching according to our priorities that a third party might catch because they don't have our corporate priorities, right? YouTube doesn't even have anything like that. That's a part of that opacity. Another aspect of the opacity of these algorithms is the fact that there is these machine learning algorithms running these big data analyses. So to some extent, every programmer who's working on the algorithm is not going to be completely aware of everything that went into this machine learning algorithm on this day versus on this day versus this algorithm on this day and this day and this day, right? There's an aspect of just the nature of machine learning algorithms that creates an inscrutability. That's what the study that I was citing by Mittelstadt was kind of getting into. So that's also a question of like whether or not these algorithms should always be deployed for certain kinds of things. Is it ethical to deploy an algorithm that might be systematically targeting protected classes of people when you aren't even sure how you would correct those things, what data is being used to generate those decisions? Who's responsible, right? This is a big topic of the paper that I was citing. Because Deepseek is not interacting with specific research with any depth, you're not able to kind of get into that deeper conversation. Instead, you're stuck at this kind of level of like, yeah, there's lack of opacity. What does that mean? That's the thing with Deepseek, is that you're not able to get to really clarify the language that you're using when you are depending on
the AI to kind of generate language. Different language connotes different things. So in my paper, I use a lot of like language that firmly condemns these platforms, firmly places responsibility on these platforms, because again, this is one of my own priorities as a writer. I'm not taking these platforms at face value, whereas Deepseek will cite YouTube as a source for how their algorithm works and will take what they say at face value. And it's doing that again in a way that's not even traceable. I don't even know what article about YouTube's algorithm on their official blog Deepseek is citing and taking at face value. I'm interacting with a lot of research that is like from third parties, right? People who care about data and AI ethics. In algorithmic ethics. So Brett Mittelstadt is a researcher whose whole priority is concerns about the ethics of how algorithms are deployed, not just in social media, but within like insurance and law and all these things. I specifically found this paper by this person who has these priorities that are aligned with my own priorities. And I understand how the information in their study is being deployed, the scope of their study, right? Why it's useful for me to use that study. All of these things, these are all questions about like the sources, the nature of the sources, how my priorities and the priorities of the people who I'm citing, mesh or don't mesh. That is not to say like, I'm only citing people who I agree with. Citation is inherently a political thing, right? It means something when you cite YouTube versus like a Brett Mittelstadt on how algorithms work. As a researcher, you are deciding what sources, what kinds of researchers, what kinds of information are a part of the information that you trust, that you value. Deepseek is not able to do this. And that's what ultimately makes the paper weaker, right? It's this inability to use language that strongly places responsibility anywhere. It's this neutral language where we're just honestly just defining terms. We're defining terms using whatever kinds of sources. That's the essay. So here's some of the language that I use to describe. In part of my essay, I start talking about Algorithms of Oppression by Safia Noble. And in that section, I'm really getting into words like egregious, right? Inscrutable, dominated, a scandal. Platforms launder user data to advertisers and political think tanks. Deepseek is not going to use this condemnatory language. Almost inherently, because it is this large language learning model, it's going to want to use language that is applicable to the most people, right? Whoever comes into Deepseek and wants to use it to write a paper should be able to write a paper, right? So there's this prioritization of the general, which ends up minimizing, right, these perspectives from like different diverse groups, marginalized groups. Something that I really hated from the Deepseek essay, getting on her ass. Deepseek uses this language of alternative voices to describe to activists. I'll read this sentence. This system also marginalizes alternative voices. Activists or grassroots movements, often lacking the resources to optimize for algorithms or observe revenue losses, struggle to gain visibility. This issue of visibility is also discussed in Safia Noble's Algorithms of Oppression, and it talks about how especially Black women on the internet experience a lessened discoverability from their target audiences because of all of these algorithmic mechanisms. This language of alternative voices is so non-specific to who you're talking about and what kinds of dynamics, what kind of power dynamics you're talking about. Alternative voices, we could be talking about political content creators on the alt-right pipeline, right? If we're talking about alternative voices. So what is the utility of this language of alternative voices if we could be talking about such a broad spectrum of people? You would never see this language of alternative voices within any kind of study that's more specific. If you're reading African American studies, they're not going to refer to Black content creators as alternative voices. You might see the word alternative voices to describe like the differences between various Black content creators. To see alternative voices used to describe activists and grassroots movements, again, we could be talking about the Tea Party. You know what I'm saying? It's so non-specific and so nondescript And that's by design, because this is ultimately a large language model that is meant to be utilized by a wide variety of people. That's ultimately why AI sucks at writing. AI has nothing interesting to write. Your biases allows you to engage in a lively, engaging discussion about what you're talking about, right? You get to use language, you get to pick and choose language to say exactly what you want to say about who you want to say it about. Without that, your writing is kind of boring. You know what I'm saying? Your writing is kind of pointless. What are you actually contributing if you can't even name marginalized groups? Like, what are we really talking about here? If you can't prioritize like a decolonial lens, what are we even really talking about here? That is my comparison of Deepseek's essay to my essay. So I originally gave Deepseek a 7 out of 10. I think I want to decrease that to like a 5 out of 10. The fact that none of the information in this essay is verifiable anywhere. Like, I was searching through their references. I had no idea what they were talking about, what studies, if they made up the studies out of their robot booty. And I think that has to decrease the grade a little bit. And then for the writing itself, there's so many stylistic things that just make the writing uninteresting and broad and vague. If I knew a person wrote this document would be marked up with, okay, what are your priorities? Okay, but what do you think about this? Why are you talking about this? And it's interesting because it almost feels like the question was at odds with how Deepseek is able to even answer the question. Being unable to name specific marginalized groups and how they be impacted by the algorithm is like at odds with the research question itself that is specifically talking about how certain accounts are prioritized over others. That requires a decolonial lens. That requires a lens that it has a capacity to interrogate power. So Deepseek is kind of struggling to get at this, again, by the nature of the fact that it is a large language learning model. If you're writing a paper for a school and you're trying to interrogate power and all of these things, Deepseek is not going to be your friend. You're actually going to be working against like some of the language that Deepseek is going to spit out. Are there any use cases for AI when it comes to writing? Let me tell you what I think. AI is incredibly useful for generating summaries of texts that you upload PDFs of. Now, I have not done this with Deepseek or ChatGPT. I'm not sure that they have the capacity to do this. Usually, if I'm generating a summary of a text, I'll use notebook.lm. I can ask Google's notebook.lm very specific questions about what I wanted to summarize and from what lens I wanted to summarize a text. And these summaries are not for like turning in. These summaries are for my own reference. These summaries are for me to be able to glance at after reading the text and be like, yeah, this is what I got from it. And the thing with that is that, again, those citations that it gives you, like if you generate a summary with notebook.lm and you ask it to put citations into that summary, those page numbers might be very incorrect. Or like it's going to be coming from the PDF that you upload, but it's still going to be like, okay, this is not what page this is on. You're going to have to find those citations yourself and put in the page numbers in order for it to be optimally useful as like a way of creating an annotated bibliography. But I feel like that's like kind of the greatest use case for it. Something else I think is actually very useful. I use this program called Glean, and I have access to this program via the Department of Accessibility Services. And Glean is a great platform for talking to. Glean will generate an outline of any audio. So it uses a natural learning processing model to scan the audio for all of the words that are being said, and it'll generate an outline of what is said. I use this for writing, even though it's meant to be used for note taking. But sometimes what I'll do is if I have an essay idea in mind or an essay prompt in mind, I'll just hit record and start speaking to Glean. Very fantastic way of organizing my thoughts. Like it really comes in clutch, especially when I'm like overwhelmed by a topic. The more I talk and just like talk through what I'm thinking, the outline that gets generated will be a good lead for research. So if I'm talking like a talk, and it'll spit out an outline that's like, okay, you talked about the accessibility of information, algorithmic bias against marginalized groups. You talked about how content creators are impacted by algorithms, right? These are the kinds of bullet points that Glean will spit out, and that is a good lead for like further research, right? If you want to implement these kind of accessibility tools, that it is a very, 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 very useful. I highly recommend. It's also just useful to have like a transcript of yourself talking through your paper, because then you can kind of read back what you said, and it gives you a good start for what you want to start writing about. So I'll often use Glean in that way. Are there any other AI tools that I have used that have been useful? Nothing else has been very useful, to be honest, because I have a very specific voice when I write, because I want what I want to say to be said. You know what I'm saying? I actually care about what's coming out of the AI. But also, I know that my teachers can tell, right, when the AI is just spitting out whatever it wants to spit out, right? It's unfocused, it's disorganized, and it's unengaging, it's uninteresting. It's not something to the caliber that I could produce, right? So I would never lean on Deepseek, ChatGPT, any of these tools to actually write an entire essay, because I know that I have something more interesting to say than what these tools can spit out. And I think everybody should know that. It's like anything that you have to say, there are different ways that we can incorporate tools like Glean, like Notebook.lm, to help us say what we want to say. But depending on the AI to say something interesting is never going to be like very useful. I think about this in terms of even like, you know how people will use large language models to generate like captions for social media, and it's like this large wall of text, and it's just the caption on social media, right? But you can always tell like it's generic, it's boring, it's uninteresting, right? People don't put the caption there for the people. People are putting the caption there for Instagram's algorithm to detect that there's a wall of text on their post, which will both boost it in the algorithm and give people something to, it gives the algorithm something to engage with, even when people are not engaging with it. Writing doesn't work that way. You know what I'm saying? Just because you have words on a page doesn't mean that your teacher is going to give you points for just words on a page. But that's interesting to think about, because that's exactly what Instagram is giving you in that case, right? Instagram is giving you credit for just words on a page, in the form of like SEO, certain keywords within the text that you generate. Oh, we have words on a page, so we get points for SEO on this post or on this blog, etc., etc., etc. Right? But that's not like, it's interesting how that's not the way that academia operates, but that is the way that like our Google search and page rank and search engine optimization operates. It's giving mixed signals to the kids, to the girls, right? The girls are getting this signal that words on a page count when it comes to the importance and value of written text. But they're getting the opposite message within academia, within schools. So I think that's interesting to think about. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this. If you found any of these reflections useful, my teachers out there especially, who might be teaching kiddies who don't understand that AI doesn't have anything any more valuable to say than they do, show them this video. Let me know if there are any AI tools that you find useful when you're writing. Again, I'm still kind of new to this. I know the kids are using the AI in all kinds of ways for all kinds of things. It's the end of the video. But if you like this video, like, subscribe, do all that jazz. Yeah. Bye. AI sucks.